Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning to Building Intersectional Workplaces in the Environmental Sector. Really happy to have you all here. I've had a chance to chat with a lot of you throughout the week, 2 days, I guess, so it's been really great to get to know everybody, and I'm really grateful to be on this panel today. So my name is Andrew Janzic. I'm a recruiter and employer services lead at Eco Canada. Hopefully you're all familiar with Eco Canada now and the work that we do, but if you have any questions about recruitment, HR, my team and I are happy to help. So really excited to be here discussing this hot topic, I guess, today. For myself professionally, I've been in HR for about 12 years now, and I think one of the biggest pieces that I enjoy about it is building teams and really, how do we structure those teams and how do we get the most out of those teams for our organizations? And I think that's why this panel is, so important today. So how do we really build these intersectional workplaces and what are the strengths that we get from those workplaces? So, as we move forward, in this kind of challenging climate, too, that everybody is probably aware of, we have to really think about how intersectionality and different backgrounds can really be a benefit for the workforce and can help but organizations build these strong teams and really the ROI that will come back on that intersectionality. So I'm really grateful to have our panelists with us today. A lot of experience and knowledge within the sector, within different sectors. So we'll start off with Richard Lemaire. So Richard is an industry workforce partnership specialist, energy, renewables, and non-residential construction with the Government of Alberta. Richard's passion for workforce development began during his studies at the University of Saskatchewan, and his interest arose in roles where he supported individuals with disabilities in finding and retaining employment. Early on, he recognized that one of the biggest barriers these individuals faced wasn't their own ability, but rather employers who lacked the experience and resources to support. So Richard's been working with the government for nearly 14 years. I had a chance to chat with Richard last night, some great insights into the policies and how the policies get made, some of the decisions he kind of shared with me, and it was really neat to see. So thank you, Richard, and welcome. Next, we have Penney McTaggart-Cowan, who is the VP of Marketing and Member Experiences at Calgary Co-op. Having joined in 2018, Penney brings almost 25 years of experience in customer research and marketing to Calgary Co-op. As Vice President of Marketing and Member Experiences, she leads the marketing and membership program for all Calgary Co-op lines of business, including Community Natural Foods. Penney is incredibly proud and honored to be part of leadership team, especially because of its mission to deliver exceptional member experiences and its deep connection to the community. So thank you so much, Penney, and welcome today. We're excited to hear some of your experiences and excited to ask some questions. And then last but not least, we've got Ty McKinney, who's the co-founder and CEO of 8-Bit Cortex. Dr. McKinney completed his PhD at the University of Utah on brainwave technology and mental health assessment. So he served as the research director of Branch Out Neurological Foundation for 10 years, managing their peer review, granting program and science communication messaging. More recently, he co-founded 8-Bit Cortex to adapt his research into a gamified engagement survey platform to automate mental wellness in his research, and outcome reporting. So really excited to have Ty here. He's going to be leading us through our first activity, actually, where he's going to talk a little bit about 8-Bit Cortex and a QR code to actually get in, have a look at the program. So welcome to all our panelists, and I'm excited to have them here. And maybe I'll turn it right over to Ty so he can share a little bit about his 8-Bit Cortex.
Awesome, thank you. Can you guys hear me properly? Or should I move this up a little bit? Is that better? So if we could get the slide advanced to the QR code. All right, here we go. So when you guys scan this QR code, it's going to ask you to sign in with a Google account. All the information is de-identified, and this is purely for educational purposes. So this will give you the opportunity to check in with your own burnout risk score, as well as one questionnaire associated with neurodiversity. So this is an opportunity for you to get a little bit of data, and then once we have a few people submitting their responses, we can transition it over to a dashboard, and we can look at what this data looks like in real time. So we can get a sense of, what does this room look like in terms of burnout risk and its relationship to neurodiversity. And then hopefully that'll set us off for a really engaging conversation, I think.
Awesome. Thank you, Ty. I was really excited when Ty showed this too, and we were chatting a little bit about it in our kind of pre-meetings, and I think I made a joke, but I think it's kind of cool because you could actually send real-time data to your manager and be like, this is where I'm at, I'm not feeling good. So I really like that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we'll let you guys download that and maybe have a look and take a second. Meanwhile, we'll get in right away to some of our panel questions. Our first section is on understanding intersectionality in the workforce. So, a lot of people talk about intersectionality. We hear it a lot. Obviously, DEI is a term we're not allowed to use anymore, so we can't say that one. But intersectionality, I think, at its core is essential. It's really important to have, no matter what you're doing, whether it's sports, whether it's art, whether it's business, it's essential to have diverse thoughts, diverse ways of going about processes and policies. So, what is intersectionality, and how does it really relate to building strong teams? So my first question is let's see, I'm lost. My first question is for Penney. So I think, is it for you? Sorry, I'm totally lost here. Okay. Missing? Okay. I think it's for, we'll go Penney. We'll go Penney. We're going to keep it moving along, so I apologize. So has your leadership journey been shaped by intersectionality? Can you share a pivotal moment or experience where you recognize the impact of intersectionality in your leadership? So two-parter. Thank you.
So hopefully the mic is working. So as he had mentioned in my bio, I came from an environment of consulting, really, with Ipsos, which is a global consumer research, market research firm. And it was very interesting. At the time when I joined, it was the Angus Reid Group. And Angus, you still hear him consulted in the news, particularly, anything of, significance, national impact, like elections and all of those things, but I really had a phenomenal opportunity of working beside him. And one of the interesting things in my own journey was really about being in an organization that was actually skewed 65% female versus 35% male. And while everybody was in, at that time, very traditional Monday through Friday roles, what Angus quickly realized was, wait a second, 2/3 of my workforce here are going to have babies, and they're going to take a year off, and I'm going to lose. For him, it was a business decision of there's going to be an impact to revenue here. This is a client service business. We're going to lose our key client contacts. We have to really pivot to be more open and flexible in terms of just meeting the needs of the environment that you were in and being able to drive your business forward. And so, he very quickly introduced the idea of full-time equivalent positions of like 0.8, 0.6. And so people were able to work that flexibility, whether you were, a person going on a mat leave or somebody who would be going on a parental leave. This was afforded to everybody long before it was an issue or brought forward as an opportunity to make things more inclusive in the workplace. Because if you chose to have a family earlier in your career, it would severely limit your career opportunity. And he didn't want to see that happen. And I think for him, it was more, I have an opportunity to maintain my revenue base if I'm just a little bit flexible. And oh, by the way, these people are only earning 80% of their salary, but I'm still getting 100% out of them. And so it really, I think from that perspective, created a very collaborative work environment. It created an openness and understanding of each other's needs. It identified the need to be flexible and the need to create environments that allow your team to flourish and thrive and to be able to contribute. And not everybody is going to work on the exact same schedule, but if we are collectively organized, that we understand what the requirements are and the expectations of this more flexible environment compared to our competitive set or compared to other industries at the time, it really gave us that edge. And I think our clients valued it. We as team members valued it. It drove significant loyalty to the organization, even through changes in ownership. This was one of the unique things that they were very surprised about, was like, wow, you really have this different work environment. And I think, for me going forward, coming out of that, both originally as a contributor and then ultimately as a leader within the organization, you recognize the absolute importance of meeting people where they are and understanding what specific needs they have, be it do they need special tools or software that helps them manage neurodiversity with respect to reading and writing and those kinds of challenges that people have, but are very capable, but just need an incremental piece of technology or a step that helps them to contribute to their full capabilities, and really leveraging that creative thought and all of the other areas that I find tend to excel, even if they are experiencing a challenge or, are not necessarily typical in how you would see them performing in other ways. And so it's recognizing people where they are, recognizing what they need, and really working to provide that environment to really maximize what you can do for your team, and because ultimately that will benefit the organization.
Awesome. Yeah, great answer. Piece that I really liked there that you touched on was how forward-thinking, kind of that piece about flexibility is. And I think especially from the HR perspective, as we look at it, trends coming in, post-COVID and in recent years, a lot of people really want that piece in their work. So, seeing that and how it really comes in and plays on the return for investment for the business. Great answer. Really appreciate that. Thanks. So my next question is for Ty. From your perspective, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about neurodiversity in the workforce or in the workplace?
Awesome. Thank you. So just before I get this, I'll ask the AV person if you want to switch it over to the dashboard, and that way we can take a quick peek at the data as well.
Medium.
You might have to do the refresh. But long and short, as it comes to neurodiversity, I think in many ways it's actually a little bit too new of a concept to have a lot of misconceptions. So we've actually got an opportunity to just have a bit of a common understanding in this sense. And fundamentally, neurodiversity is very straightforward. Oh, there we go. Look, we've got lots of burnout risk.
Yeah, that makes more sense. I was going to say, we're day 2 here.
Yeah.
I know I'm pretty burned.
So again, you can start to see a pattern, a profile of kind of what the character, the neurodiverse character of this room looks like. So neurodiversity, quite simply, is diversity in brain function. And there's lots of different brain networks, meaning there's lots of different ways in which one can be neurodiverse. So the ones that you're probably most commonly thinking about is in relation to ADHD, autism, or language processing. Those tend to be the ones that are the most commonly talked about within workplaces. And usually that's because there's some degree of accommodations associated with it. But you can take almost any mental health condition and you can understand where it comes from and a difference in just the way that the brain is processing information. And the thing that I think is really important is that there's no such thing as a bad neurodiversity profile. Everybody has strengths, everybody has weaknesses, and following up on your answer, I think it's really important that we learn how to understand that on our team so that way people can be supported to offset their weaknesses so they can really leverage their strengths. So just one example to make this super concrete anecdotally is how many people in this room have an accountant or a lawyer on retainer for their companies? How many people like to be referred to as neurotic? Okay, so there was a bit of a laugh there. I actually want my lawyer and my accountant to be a little neurotic, because what that means is that they are going to be a little stressed out about risks. They're going to manage risks a little differently than me. I'm an entrepreneur. I manage this quite differently than accountants and lawyers in that regard. But if I have a lawyer who is really laid back, not worried about too much, there's the possibility that he's not going to have enough concern for those low probability but high impact outcomes, like being sued, that could have a really big impact on my business. So in this case, even though we wouldn't want somebody to, we wouldn't say, oh, we don't want you to be neurotic in this sense, it's actually an asset. The way that they're managing risk with that longer term profile and being more sensitive to risk actually makes them really, really good at their job. So this is kind of what I mean by it. There's no such thing as a bad neurodiversity profile. It's all just a matter of, is your strengths aligned with your roles? And to the extent that you have challenges, is there supports in the workplace to offset that, so that, again, you can really perform at your best? And it sounds like your organization was doing that before it was cool.
Yeah, we were very lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I really like the piece about working to your strengths. I think a lot of people, when they're getting advice, it's like sometimes placed advice to build your entire skill set and, try to work on your weaknesses. It's just focus on your strengths and, capitalize on those strengths. So great points. So Richard, can you share how the government of Alberta has supported intersectionality and some of the key projects or initiatives that have been implemented?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'll talk about is a little bit about what the government of Alberta actually does within the organization that supports intersectionality within the workplace. So we have a number of employee resource groups that are fairly well attended. We also have it was once called the DEI committee. I'm not sure what we're going to call it now, but it still exists. So that committee is actually co-chaired with an executive sponsor, so someone who's at an assistant deputy minister level. So leadership is bought into the diversity of the organization and supports this committee. So they tend to have monthly information sessions where the topics vary on anything from neurodiversity to LGBTQ to Black History Month. We make sure that there's consistent information for people, and it's just information to expose people to the diversity of what their workforce likely looks like without even realizing it. The other piece that I do want to talk on is beyond what we do within the organization for inclusivity. We do have grant programs that exist. So one of the programs that my team specifically leverages is called the Workforce Partnerships Program. And it's a grant program that allows us to work with industry and employers to address workforce issues. And so one of the things that our team has funded in the last few years is initiatives that help with intersectionality. So I'm going to run through a couple of examples of some projects that were completed that were quite noteworthy. First one, in the audience, I have colleagues from Careers in Energy. So what we did was funded them to do a bit of research to understand the diversity of the sector and some of the issues that the energy sector is experiencing. And once they had an identification of what some of the issues could be, they used that to inform some follow-up actions that they could do. So some things that they did were a webinar, or not a webinar, podcast and blog series where they actually found people of diverse backgrounds who were working within the sector and interviewed them to kind of give perspective of why did they work in the energy sector and what is it that they enjoy. So it just kind of gives perspective of what that workforce looks like. The other thing that they did was also a webinar series. So the webinar series is a series of 10 different sessions that employers could attend, and at the end of it they would end up with a certificate of completion. So the topics were everything from, let me look at my notes, accommodations at work, employee resource groups, how to be a champion, leadership behaviors, and generational diversity. So those are some of the great things that was happening out of that project. The other one that I want to talk about is a project that I had with Electricity Human Resources Canada. So that's power line technicians and everyone related to the work that's happening to keep the lights on in the room today. What they found is that they were wanting to do something called Illuminate Opportunities, and it's an Alberta, made in Alberta resource of tools and videos to help support HR professionals to employ people of diverse backgrounds. And that was developed through consultation with all of the HR leaders within the sector. What they found when they started creating this tool, which is available online, if you were to Google Illuminate Opportunities, you would find it. But as they created this tool, the HR professionals were realizing that, you know, it was really good to be able to like quickly pick your brain about, well, how did you address this issue in your workplace? So we provided them a little additional funding to create an online peer group. Basically, they can crowdsource support for specific issues that they're dealing with, and it was very private and located kind of on a site where they can talk back and forth, and it's not something that would go public. So it was quite I would say a pretty well-received thing that they did. After the funding ended, they continued to self-fund this portal. So obviously the funding that we put towards that was beneficial. And then the last piece is around the tech sector. So those two were my sectors, so I can kind of speak to them quite eloquently. I can't speak to the tech sector when it's my colleague, but what they did do was they identified women aged 25 to 35 in junior roles in the tech sector who demonstrated leadership potential as well as interest in equity and diversity. And what they did was they mentored these women and provided them kind of exposure to leadership training and development and equity in the workplace education as well. Basically, the goal there was to take these young emerging leaders and build them up to become future champions for diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So as these people move up into leadership roles, they are already naturally educated and informed on diversity and inclusion. That's me.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Sounds like some great work that's been done, you know, just to understand, you know, how intersectionality and how diversity and inclusion can really impact workplaces. So I guess a little break here. If anybody has any questions about kind of the first piece that we've chatted about, understanding some of the intersectionality, great time to ask now. We'll have a little break and lull in the action. So any questions at all in the audience? No? Ready to go home? No, just kidding.
Lunch.
So we'll hop into the next section, which is basically, so we understand now kind of a little bit more about how intersectionality really plays for everybody on the panel here. So we'll talk a little bit about implementing these strategies and making them a little bit more actionable. So how do we, you know, and that was a good segue there to Richard with leadership. How does leadership embrace these sort of, I guess, norms and cultural pieces to the organization that, you know, we can see are beneficial, but maybe aren't quite being implemented to the top of their abilities at this moment. So my first question is for Ty. It ties in with that. So what practical strategies can organizations adopt to create better retention practices for neurodivergent, again, that word, professionals?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that really needs to happen is you have to get to understand your workforce and, again, really try to understand what their needs are. So the data that was presented on there, one of the data points that stuck out for this room is that this room is not particularly extroverted. In fact, you're quite introverted. So one thing that would imply from that is a hybrid work policy would be really critical for all the people working within this room. Obviously, you're at a conference, so you're got some extroverted tendencies. So having a policy that allows people to select whether or not they could work from home one day or come into the office and have that work in such a way that it's beneficial for both introverts and extroverts has got that flexibility is, I think, one of the more salient examples of a neurodiversity inclusion policy that we've probably been having over the last few years, kind of coming out of the pandemic in a number of ways. So that's one example where, again, if you have a group of extroverted people, they're going to benefit from coming into the office. They're going to benefit from the social engagement, the little micro rewards they might get as they complete tasks. Whereas people that are more on the introverted side of the spectrum, they're going to prefer the stability and the flexibility of being able to work from home. And empowering them to work in those capacities is going to unlock their full potential in that respect. Of course, we still have to make sure that people are actually getting stuff done and stuff like that, so it's not fully one way or the other. But having a policy that is flexible to accommodate both kinds of individuals will ultimately support the workplace really, really well. I'll share one other quick anecdote that I think illustrates this quite clearly. So I think it was just over a year ago now, my company is doing a little bit of consulting with the deaf and hard of hearing community. And one of the places that we looked was in the workplace. And it was realized that simply closed captioning in virtual meetings was a really, really incredible support system for these individuals. That if they had difficulty hearing, that they could be able to read. And since a lot of meetings were happening on Teams, Zoom, those sorts of things, this allowed the people that had this particular disability to participate with minimal barriers in the workplace. And it was very inclusive in that sense. But it turns out that this support that was identified for people that were hard of hearing was actually beneficial for lots of other people within the workplace. If you are like me and you have some ADHD, you might just benefit from being able to read as well as listen to someone, and that would help them be able to follow along as well. For all the people that were English as a second language, they might struggle to follow some of the faster conversation pieces, but again, being able to read the conversation in addition, that was impactful for them. So the universal design principle is that something that works good for one kind of person is likely going to improve situations for other people as well. So in this case, an accommodation was put in the workplace for people that are hard of hearing actually ended up being beneficial for most people within the organization. So that's one of the things that we're kind of able to discover on that. So it's really thinking about things from that kind of lens. It's not like these accommodations have to be one-off, really expensive kinds of things. When we look at software and other kinds of supports in that way, AI is a really good example that can be very beneficial for people with ADHD and autism. It can really kind of equalize the playing field in many ways and support people so that their weaknesses don't become to their detriment. And again, they're able to really fully engage and show off their strengths at their full capacity. So that's two really practical examples for how you could take neurodiversity and apply it to your own organizations. Again, think about workplace policies, as well as something as simple as if someone is hard of hearing, having closed captions on Zoom or Microsoft Teams actually ends up making everybody perform a little bit better in that sense with that inclusion piece. And there's data to support that these kinds of efforts actually do improve companies' bottom line. So I can get into that a little bit later on.
Great, thank you. A little bit off context, but what I was thinking about when you were kind of bringing in the closed caption is ever since the pandemic, I've started watching movies with closed caption too. And it just provides additional context. It provides sometimes, so it's really kind of, I don't know if it really plays in there, but I thought it was an interesting piece for sure. My next question is for Penney. So what key considerations can leaders take into account when they're making these policies and strategies?
Okay. It's a great question, and yeah, there are lots of strategies and tactics, but I think ultimately it comes down to the type of culture that you want within the organization. It really starts at the top, and many, you can describe culture, there's lots of many definitions of it. You could look it up in any business book or anything else like that, but at its core, it's the worst behavior you're willing to tolerate. And you have to decide how you want to mitigate the potential for workplace bias and those kinds of things, because they are really, unintentional, but behaviors that negatively impact others. And so you have to actively work to define what you're willing to tolerate, and ideally that level is high enough that you do a lot of things to mitigate it. And organizationally, we've invested heavily in training. And training is really about, and we have a very diverse workforce, let me assure you, we're owned by 400,000+ Calgarians. I don't know if anybody understands, there's probably people here from Calgary who are members. Thank you for your patronage. But we're owned, you come in, you buy a share, which is $1, and you basically own a share in the organization, and you receive benefit for owning that share, dividend payout and such. But because we're member-owned, it's critically important that we represent the communities which we serve. And so we're very proud of the fact that we have a very diverse workforce. ethnically, neurodiversity. We have a wide representation within the businesses that we operate, and we're very proud of that. We also want to make sure that we are fostering a culture of tolerance and understanding, so that those who work alongside individuals who are neurodiverse or have, are on the spectrum, are able to understand the nature of that individual. And because they are neurodiverse, it does not mean that they are not capable. And having that understanding. And so there's been a lot of educational programs that have been mandatory where everybody has participated in this training. We are also looking at how we hire, because it really comes down to making sure that you are representing the community and the evolving community. And so putting ourselves into job fairs and hiring opportunities that give us exposure to groups that are not typically what you would see for resumes flowing in. So putting ourselves in positions whereby we are giving Calgary Co-op presence in communities that they may not have considered us as an employer. So actively working to make sure that we are fostering those differences within our workforce, because it is understanding those differences that allow us to better deliver what we want to do in terms of that exceptional member experience at store level. And really, those are some of the bigger things that we have done. We also, provide a lot of training and encouragement for leadership development. So identifying high potential individuals and putting them on leadership development tracks to ensure that we are actually in our own succession planning, making sure that we have diversity showing through in terms of representation of the organization over time, and making sure that we're able to remain consistent with, first and foremost, what the market needs are, what the employees' needs are, and also, what our member expectations are. And our members, as member owners, are deeply vested and deeply passionate that we do provide that diversity and that they see themselves when they are shopping and engaging with Calgary Co-op.
Awesome, great answer. I think it sounds like there's a lot of kind of systemic sort of forward-thinking policies going into place, which is good to see, and that's what really changes the organization and the culture, right? That's what builds it.
It's about culture and the type of culture that you want. At individual levels, there's lots of tactics that can be applied, but you really have to set the tone with the culture, and it starts right there. Because no matter what else you're doing, if you're not focused on that culture, the ability for those other initiatives to be successful, really, it's undermined if your culture doesn't really reflect and embody what the expectation is of the organization in terms of how we position ourselves, how we treat each other, how we are welcoming to everyone who comes through our doors as a retailer in the city.
Amazing, thank you. I'll give you my Calgary Co-op number later, and maybe you can boost my shares a bit.
I just want to make sure you have the app. That's
okay. Perfect, thanks. So my next question is for Richard. What role do regulatory frameworks play in holding organizations accountable for fostering inclusivity in the workforce or workplace?
Yeah. Leave it to the government guy to tell you about the policies that you have to follow. So there's some things that exist. So there are regulatory frameworks. In government, we call them carrots and sticks. So a stick, does anyone here know of the Legislated Employment Equity Program? It's a federal program. No? Okay, I'll quickly tell you about it. I'm not going to bore you with policy too much. So basically what LEAP is, it's a federal program around encouraging employers that are federally regulated to employ people who are of diverse backgrounds. Specifically, the goal of it is to make sure that the labor market is representative of the community that it exists in. Co-op's already doing that. They don't need to be federally regulated. But federally regulated organizations could be things like transportation companies that cross borders, could be pipelines that cross borders, the air transportation, so flight attendants, other ones like banks, and marine shipping and ferry. So these federally regulated industries are then required to report up to the federal government about, how many people do you employ that are basically within specific groups. Part of that is to hold them accountable and ensure that they are meeting those requirements. So that's the stick. Where the stick gets really, really hard is when if you haven't been reporting or there's been some infractions, you will be fined. So the first offense is $10,000, and after several offenses, it can go up to $50,000. So that's the not nice way of pushing inclusivity, but it is one of the frameworks that exist. Another one that's a little less of a stick, a little bit more of a carrot, would be community benefit agreements. Does anyone here have any exposure to community benefit agreements or know what they are? I see some kind of. So basically, a community benefit agreement is when you are putting in place maybe a large publicly funded project or a large commercial or industrial or institutional project that may be in a community that could be impacted. So rather than having the company that wins the project come in, bring their workforce, do the work, and leave, the goal is to try and harness the workforce that's there. So it kind of benefits the community in a number of ways. It would provide things like fair pay and good jobs. It would also may have some language in there, because it is a legal binding contract. It would have some language in there around procuring the services from employers that exist within that community. So rather than a term is called economic leakage, rather than the money that goes into that community just goes right back out, the goal is to try and have it stay there. So that's the part there. Why it's considered a bit of a kind of carrot for employers and industry is that if you have a community benefit agreement, there are some benefits that relate to streamlining of approval processes, additional funding and tax incentives for those people that bring that in. So those tend to be the two ways. But I do want to take it beyond regulatory frameworks and that kind of boring stuff, because it's like forcing people in. I think the best way to push inclusivity is a competitive labor market. So those employers that are looking to be inclusive are going to be the ones that are casting a wider net, and those are the ones that are going to be more successful in meeting their labor market needs. For example, so Eco-Canada had done an LMI study and said that in Alberta we're expecting about 83,000 new people in the environmental services workforce in the next 10 years. So there's already quite a high labor market need. I can tell you that when I talk to energy sector employers, they're saying we can't find workers. When my colleagues talk to tech or aviation, they're all saying we can't find people. So how will you set yourself apart in order to attract those people in? And so whether or not we're talking about legislated employment equity programs or community benefit agreements, it's the employers that look to employ that diverse workforce are going to be the ones that meet their workforce needs and are likely to be chosen over some of these other ones that are not. For example, there was some research that was done that found that job seekers, when looking for work, do notice if an employer is talking about being an inclusive employer. And if you're talking about Gen Z, they're even more likely to be that. Yeah. So now what? So if you're competing and you know that you're competing against many other industries, the energy sector pays 2.4 times higher than the average Canadian weekly income. So if you can't compete with them on wages, what's your sell? So that's the piece that I think regulatory frameworks, that's not what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the other stuff. When we talk about an inclusive workplace being more productive, someone over the last couple of days talked about that Canada's workforce is 30% less productive than the US workforce. But LinkedIn actually did a study and found that inclusive workplaces are 35% more productive than non-inclusive. So there's our gap filled for our productivity. Again, those are the warm and fuzzy, touchy-feely, why should you do it because you're a good employer. Take all of that out. Penney talked about it when she was talking about Angus Reid. Maybe he was doing it because he was, considerate, but he was also doing it because he had a business to run, and it was like, I need to do this, and this is going to set my business ahead. Yeah. So take the warm and fuzzy, take the regulatory framework out. If you want to be successful, you're going to have to find ways to cast a broader net, and that's one of the ways to do it, is an inclusive workforce.
I think it's a mic drop moment for the panel. It sums it up really well, right? That's kind of the whole point. Yes, it is very morally and ethically correct to do as well, but the bottom line is it's business, right? It's ROI, and that's a strength and a strategy that can be implemented as our panel sharing, which I think is awesome there. So thank you for sharing. I want to take a moment. Do we have any questions about some of the strategies and some of the things the panelists have talked about at all? Okay, so I want to go into maybe a little bit of a scenario or kind of case study for each panelist, and kind of have more of a hands-on feel for some of these kind of approaches and strategies and how they've really been implemented in your workplace. So I'm not sure if you guys have prepared anything to kind of talk about, and I'm easy with whoever wants to go first. I guess we could go tie, and maybe share a story and a hands-on example of how this has impacted something you've been working on or in a workplace.
Yeah. So I'll start off by sharing a little bit of a story about one of our first clients, and then I'll talk about some research and how it ties back in. And this is broadly related to female empowerment within the workplace. So the first client that our company was working with was actually a benefits brokerage that was female-owned, queer-owned, and they were looking to expand. And actually, since we finished up with this arrangement, they've actually since been acquired by a larger benefits firm. But when we initially did our consultation, it became apparent that much like this room, it was a group of highly agreeable women. So this had a few implications for the social dynamics and how to, for the organization to be more effective. So when you get lots of people together that are highly agreeable, they tend to feel guilty advocating for their own interest and boundaries because they want to be supportive and have a positive experience with the person they're interacting with. So as a result, this team hypothetically could have, been supporting one another to their own detriment. You see this a lot in the nonprofit sector, compassion fatigue, a lot in healthcare, where again, you see people really caring deeply, and they'll, take on that extra task. They'll, do that extra favor for their boss without realizing it's actually driving them towards burnout. So we gave them this feedback that they needed to be mindful of the fact that they did have a bunch of women that were all very agreeable, so they're very likely to be end up having a lot of yes conversations, even if somebody might not be in a position to really articulate a yes. And then how this relates to the data is that in organizations, agreeableness is actually one of those variables that explains wage inequities. You've all probably heard about the wage gap in relation to gender, that women earn something around 80 cents per dollar for men, depending on the industry, company, those sorts of things. There is a study that was done a number of years ago that found that actually agreeableness explained a lot of that wage gap. So because women on average tend to be more agreeable than men, they tend to feel more comfortable taking on that extra workload and not feeling as comfortable advocating for themselves. And this would often manifest in pay negotiations. So someone who is disagreeable every year is going to be like, I want a raise because I'm entitled to it, and they're going to be just a little stubborn about it. And as a result, those individuals over the course of their career are going to end up making more money because they're asking for it, they're initiating the conversation, and it's going to go in some direction. Whereas if you have a bunch of people that are highly agreeable, they're not going to feel as comfortable advocating for themselves to ask for a raise. So as a result, they're not going to end up making as much. And what this study found is that basically agreeable women got the short end of the stick in this regard, but agreeable men actually got an even shorter end of the stick. So one way that they could mitigate this was by actually having just open, transparent conversations about pay raises on an annual basis. So that way it wasn't the individual that was broaching the subject, it was the company broaching the subject. And as a result, that can actually take away a lot of that personality, neurodiversity-based inequity that otherwise could be emerging. So again, we were able to provide some of this feedback to this benefits brokerage that again was highly agreeable women, and they're able to take this, hire on some new people strategically to be complementary to their existing workforce, and 3 years later they're able to have a massive exit. So again, it goes to show that if you are kind and inclusive and you're trying to be proactive about trying to level the playing field in that way, and this is specifically talking about wage gaps that are often associated with gender, but in fact are driven by neurodiversity, we can actually close that in many regards. So that's one really positive take-home message that for everyone in this room is next time you talk with your HR, your supervisor, don't be scared to ask for a raise. You're probably entitled to it. The data would suggest that you might not feel comfortable asking for it, but in fact you are, that's your right. And that over time can help mitigate some of those gaps that might otherwise emerge. So that way it's not the loudest person in the room potentially or on the team getting the raises, but everybody is more equitably getting the raises. And this is something, again, we've seen from the data from peer-reviewed studies and how it related to this client that we're working with. So that's kind of one concrete take-home for everyone in this room, as well, and then to think about how that potentially could play out within their own companies if you want to potentially change policy, is if you wait for individuals to ask for a raise, they may not, especially if a highly agreeable workforce. Instead, if you initiate the conversations with the company, you're literally removing that glass ceiling.
Great example, thank you. Yeah, I was thinking of my mom always when I was younger. I always used to say, "The squeaky wheel gets the grease." always.
Yeah.
And it's true. So don't be afraid to advocate as well. I think is a good point too.
Yeah.
So Penny, did you want to? I know you already shared a couple examples of more concrete sort of how your strategies are implemented, but is there another example that you'd like to share with us?
I mean, I think just as a leader or a manager. Be open-minded, remove the blinders, because the individuals that you may have the most challenge of having a conversation with actually hold a huge amount of knowledge. Because they are neurodiverse, there are certain things that they pay attention to in detail that nobody else is picking up on. And it is very important that you give them the opportunity to have that voice. We were dealing with resolving a complex process internally whereby there would often be, it didn't happen all the time, but quite often there would be an error pop up in information that was being sent to our stores from head office that was creating a problem because the stores had no time to course correct, and we had to do additional incremental printing to be able to solve for this issue. And I got together with the IT people, and I got together with the manager, and they just, well, this is the process. And so ultimately it came down to the person who was actually responsible for creating a file that would then go to a printer, that would then go to the store. And so sitting down with this individual, with his manager, and I asked, if you could do anything differently, what would you do? He had a binder. He had a binder of detailed information that he had been documenting over the years that he had been handling this process and identifying, well, if I had this piece of information here, I could do this, and that would allow a better proofing process on the other end. And so instead of, kind of going through, yes, the process is working, it was like, okay, we need to actually change this process. What are the implications? It was fairly easy to change. We completely eliminated the error. We had an individual who had contributed that, nobody had really fully asked, what would you do differently? This is a simple question. And it worked out that, I think he felt validated. The process was easy to fix. It saved us money in the long term. It removed error. Everybody was happy at the store. Everybody was happy internally that they were able to kind of solve for this issue. But again, be open-minded. Ask the questions. You can do it in a way that not everybody is comfortable being asked questions or feel that they're being challenged. Learn to speak to people that puts them at ease, because it's not about laying blame. It's about, help me understand how you do this. Because by being open-minded in that capacity, you invariably will learn a lot about their skills that they don't necessarily make immediately visible in their day-to-day tasks, but are critically important to making sure that those tasks are very successful long-term. So.
Awesome. Another great example. Thank you. Richard, do you have an example you'd like to share with us?
Actually, I want to hijack the session quickly.
Oh, okay.
I'm just wondering, is there anyone in the room who supports underrepresented groups to get into employment? Okay. So for the employers in the room, if you could put your hands up, the people again, if the employers could look for those people, why I'm telling you that is, as an employer, you don't have to be the expert on employing people of diverse backgrounds. That's not your job. Your job is to operate your business. But your job is to know who the resources are that can support that. And those people who put up their hands are your resources. And I say that because before I was in government, I was one of those people. I worked supporting people with disabilities in employment. And I actually supported someone that wasn't at Co-op, it was at Safeway, I'm sorry. But the individual, I worked with him, but my job was called a job coach. And I was supposed to be there to support the individual in his job. What I did more of was supporting the employer and his coworkers to understand how to work with him. Because that's not what they're there for. They're running a business. So find those resources, leverage those resources, and they'll help set you far ahead compared to where you would be if you wouldn't have talked with them.
Great
Question.
Thank you. Yeah. Do we have questions? Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, yeah, Mike.
Thank you. My name's Susanna Taz, and I'm going to be one of the facilitators at a workshop after lunch from 1:30 to 3:30 about breaking down barriers, empowering your employees with disabilities. And it is a working session to find out what's going on with you as employers in your organizations, in the industries, and how can you make connections with those support networks that are free of charge, that are there for you at all times across the country. So we would love to have you there because we can't do our work unless we have relationship and connection with you, and we are here for you. So thank you.
Thank you. Great. It sounds like it'll be a good hands-on experience, which will definitely kind of work hand in hand with this session, which is great. Question? Yeah.
So the first question is how do we move from lip service for these things, right? Because that's kind of what the leadership's like, yes, 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 we're doing it. But then, well, on the day-to-day, you're still continuing to see behavior at your place of work that's not meeting, those expectations. So leadership's like, yes, we're doing our job, we've got these implemented, but down on the ground, like on the working level, you're not seeing that happen. And so I'm just wondering, what are your suggestions for that? And the second question is dealing with emotional labor, right? So we talk a lot about emotional labor, and are you finding that more people are taking on emotional labor in the workplace, which is affecting their ability to do their job and relating to burnout? And is that something that you're considering as well?
Thank you. Who wants to take the hardball one?
I can start with this one. So the first question that you asked about, how do we move beyond the lip service? One of my favorite phrases is the difference between science and messing around is writing stuff down. So if you're already doing a lot of these programs, these initiatives, trying to make the workplace more inclusive, identify what are the variables that matter to the business that would indicate that these programs are successful in different ways. My guess is like turnover, long-term disability, those kinds of claims is really where you're going to start to see the metrics improving at a later point, because these variables tend to move very slowly. So that's the first part. The second part is you were saying about emotional labor. Again, that's going to depend a lot on the neurodiversity side. So again, in this particular room, because again, the data suggests there's a high level of agreeableness, this room is likely to take on much more emotional labor than a different room where there was less agreeableness. So again, this is kind of where it comes down to understanding your workforce and kind of what are their strengths, what are their challenges. And if you do have a group of people that's taking on emotional labor, then what are some ways that they could get some additional support to relieve that labor, so to speak. And this could be as simple as taking better advantage of your benefits, and that way you can get more of the relaxation to fully recover from burnout and stress when it does occur, so that way it doesn't accumulate. So there's strategies that way. But yeah, it really comes down to just understanding your workforce. If they are taking on emotional labor, they'll probably tell you. Especially, again, as you said, if you ask the questions from a curiosity angle where you want to understand and you're creating a culture of care rather than trying to cast blame. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Ted. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
I had to ask ChatGPT to frame this question, and sorry to bring this very relevant but somewhat politicized topic.
Turn the mic off.
We'll have a chat later, Andrew. But there's a persistent perception that DEI initiatives conflict with merit-based hiring. And I think part of it is obviously there's also a cancel culture that exists and dividing people. And some companies are scaling back on their DEI programs because of that. But some are really advancing their DEI programs also on the contrary. But I think the concept around this is that companies seem to, or those that oppose DEI seem to believe that companies are lowering their standards around the merit-based hiring just to accommodate DEI. And so I guess my question is if, aside from the points you've raised and great points around the business case for DEI intersectionality, how can you kind of advise companies to navigate this process and kind of deal with that potential backlash that they're facing? And it's probably fear-based that they're really scaling back the DEI rather than moving for what's needed really.
Thanks. Anybody?
Oh, okay. Full transparency, we don't have formal DE&I policies. We hire for the best people, and that's what we work towards. And so, again, we put ourselves in job fairs and in hiring positions whereby we are casting that net wider to look at other audiences, because it's really important to us to have that diversity reflected. So I think culturally, as a cooperative, it is something that we have innately driven towards, because coming back to, culture, it's about service, caring, and excellence is how we describe our DNA. And I think that is that lens that we try to put on everything. We also know that when you reflect the communities that you serve, you're going to have a higher level of engagement. It's good for business in general. So, do we get backlash because it's not formalized? I don't know if I can explicitly state that. And I would argue that there are organizations who very early on went out with very strong positions, who rapidly discovered this was very challenging, and it wasn't that they weren't vested in improving the overall hiring process and improving the overall diversity of their organizations, but it also becomes about how fast you can pivot the organization while still moving forward. And I think, if anything, there is a heightened sense of awareness and caring. And even for us organizationally, coming back to one of the comments that you made, you'll see it reflected in your turnover. We see it in terms of our employee engagement. Our employee engagement numbers continue to improve. We know we're doing the right things that keep our team members highly engaged. We are, we used to have, we're able to fill vacancies more readily. We find that, in fact, the quality of the candidates that we're attracting for positions that we're filling, I know I can speak to this within my own team, we're seeing very strong candidates, better than we probably did 3 or 4 years ago. And I think it's in part because people are, we're actually being more thoughtful in what we're looking for and making sure that we're able to reflect that community that we serve. And I think it becomes, it has to be, you're not going to flip it on a switch. It's about building the skills and then building in the muscle. And then it becomes part and parcel of who you are as an organization. And the policies are very important, don't get me wrong. I think that it does, but it's how much the organization can take on at any one time and be successful. And maybe it is in small incremental steps that allow them to get to that, what success looks like, North Star, versus what we did see in the market was these very quick, flip over, and now there's a chief, there's a chief officer for this and and it was the same person who was doing the HR previously. And now they've just added job titles to people to signal to the public we're doing something. But their ability to fulfill fell far below expectations. And more recently, we've seen a lot of backpedaling. And I don't think it's because they aren't vested. I think it's things that are more challenging to measure, that you want to be sure that you've got the right KPIs. Coming back to your point earlier, and I'm probably taking up too much time here. As part of your performance evaluation, and building into performance evaluation, we have leading and managing as attributes. And it is in there that we look for how an individual works with their specific team members in terms of moving, growing their team and improving their skills. If you're not actually measuring individual performance on those attributes, it's very hard to set an expectation that this is what you want people to do. You do have to make it measurable. You have to make them feel vested that part of my performance evaluation is reflecting what I am doing to be accepting of the team, of looking at how I'm growing individuals, and even working with them to come up with development plans to help them build those skill sets. Like, it is very much something you have to actively do. It does not passively happen.
If I could follow up on just briefly. So part of, I think Richard, you alluded to this kind of a change of demographics within the workforce. Millennials are kind of split a little bit down the middle. If the workforce is not supportive of their mental health and they're experiencing burnout, half of them are going to kind of stick it out like older generations, and about half of them are going to say, whatever, I'm going to go somewhere else. And millennials are very famous for job hopping every year or two as a result. Gen Z has an even lower tolerance for bad mental health in the workplace. So just from a pure talent management perspective and trying to retain talent, not having these kinds of inclusive policies in place is going to really start impacting, I think, companies' bottom lines when they can't actually get the hires that they need to make the companies function in efficient ways. Because again, they hire someone, it's not a good fit, especially if it's a younger worker that's getting hired, they get replaced, and it's this constant turnover. So the canary in the coal mine in terms like KPI to really focus on is like, what's the turnover cost for like the younger workers within the company? Because that is likely going to carry through moving forward. So that number is too high. Not doing anything is not going to lower it, whereas having some degree of inclusive policy, hopefully, again, if done thoughtfully, tactfully with data and culture, should decrease that and, again, signal that they're going to have more sustainable talent management moving forward. But yeah, that's kind of a changing demographic within the workplace that is really emerging.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely see that a lot from the HR perspective too, and recruitment, and that retention piece is make no mistake about it, one of the biggest pieces, right? So, okay, so with that, I think we're going to start wrapping it up. I know we're very close on time, so I just wanted to kind of highlight the underlining principle of today, and that is, that these strategies, these policies, these ideas, they are good for business, right? So that's the bottom line. I think everybody up here on the panel said that in their answers, that this should be something that organizations implement, if it's not already implemented, really start getting down, thinking about some of the strategy, thinking about what's been discussed. I'd also really like to thank my panelists. So Richard, Penney, and Ty, you guys have been amazing. Great insight, great conversations. Hopefully, we'll have you back one day, maybe next year, and we can discuss some more. But I think, Ty, did you also have a table with your software or anything like that, or was it
no? So
demo?
Meet a few colleagues will be wandering around for the afternoon. So if you're interested in learning more about our software, the way that we're doing things, please come have a chat, and we would love to see where there might be some opportunity to support you.
Awesome. Thank you.